Back in December, I had to paint a house in South Carolina, and I remember it well because it was the week of our Christmas potluck, and we had that great ham, and I think for some reason I remember making a ham on stage, but that's sort of blurry. I've forgotten that part, but I do remember the ham, and I also remember that part of that job was I was going to leave directly after a potluck, which I was a little worried about because I don't know, there's something about being a preacher for all these years that I fall asleep almost on the way home on Sunday afternoons. I don't know why, it's just natural for me to fall asleep. So I'm like, I got a 9-hour drive plus a potluck, like a stomach full of potluck ham, like that shouldn't go well. So one thing I like to do when I travel, and I don't know about you, but I think there's nothing better than an audiobook. Like better than music, better than even podcasts, and I love listening to podcasts, but if you can get a great audiobook on a trip, man, it just seems to make the time go by. So I left the church that Sunday afternoon, and Josiah is actually the one who recommended Ready Player One, and I bought the audiobook, and I'll tell you, I didn't have high expectations because I can't really think of many other things I'm less interested in than video games. Like I played Wii with Reagan when she was a baby. Other than that, I am not a gamer. I know that shocks all of you, but I had zero interest, but I heard it was good, and I was like, what the heck, I got an 18-hour round trip, so I might as well. So I left the church with the audiobook going, and like a garbage bag of ham. Basically, I took half a ham. Now, this was magical. I'd like to repeat this. I don't think it could be done. It was just one of those sweetest moments in life. But the book was fantastic. Because I'm old, and it was talking about 80s trivia, and there was a lot of 80s references, and I grew up in the 80s. I graduated from high school in 1987, so it just hit that sweet spot where I actually understood all of the references. And I thought, well, I'll just take the ham to South Carolina and try it later, but instead I started nibbling on the ham. And I will admit, by the time I got there, there was no ham. There was 4.5 inches of ham, and then there was no ham. And something about that dehydrated me perfectly that I never had to pee. I stopped one time in 9 hours. That's a record. I could probably be a long-haul truck driver if I just had enough ham and another book that good. It was great. But anyway, so I might be a little bit prejudiced because the ham was so good and I didn't have to pee, but I'm telling you, I was captivated. It seemed like I was there in 5 minutes, and I really couldn't hardly wait. And it was weird because it was I think the audiobook was 17 hours, which was perfect. And I honestly couldn't wait to get back in the truck I left on Tuesday, and after painting the house, I honestly couldn't wait to get back in the truck and drive back home to listen to the rest of it because it was fantastic. Now, your mileage may vary. You may have my daughter read the book. My wife didn't. We went to the movie together. I thought the film was great, but I will say, I think the book is better. Now, that's really not what we're going to talk about this morning, but I just want to tell you, I've experienced that, and I'm sure you have. Maybe. Do you think these batteries are good? Oh, yeah, they're probably fine. Not so much. Oh, thank you. That's even smarter. I've forgotten how to use one of these. You give me that first. Sorry. Yeah. Did I mention I graduated high school in 87? Anyway, but I've had that experience, and you've had that experience where you go and the movie doesn't quite live up to what you expected. But that's really not what we're talking about. We're talking about the book. The Bible book, I believe, is better for you and for me than any of these movies that you've seen. Now, here's why. Because all of the movies that we've seen, they really are telling us, not all of the movies, but all of these type of movies are telling us or giving us a vision for the future, right? While I was in that van and while I was eating ham and it's starting to rhyme, it's starting to sound like a Dr. Seuss rhyme, but it was glorious. I could see the future of Ready Player One. I could see a world where, as he said, reality is a bummer, and people would go inside a game, and where people would meet up there and go to school there and do business there. I could see that future. It was so real. I entered into that future. It was amazing. And I was thinking over the last few months, I was isn't it interesting that I would say that actually we get most of the vision we have for the future from movies, right? Like if you think right now, like what do you think the future of mankind holds? I'm not talking about a couple years from now. I'm not talking about after the next election or not even like maybe when the kids grow up or when you retire. I'm like way out. Let's think about like what do we think the future holds? And I would bet that your point of reference and my point of reference, if we were talking about this, at least the language we would use is we'd say, maybe it's like Blade Runner. I hope not, that'd be weird. But like, maybe it's like, and we would probably use the language of movies to sort of give our vision for the future, right? Now, it's interesting sort of what those visions are. Like Star Trek vision is the vision where technology is very benevolent and aliens come along, but they're friendly mostly, And I'll admit I've never been a Trekkie, but I even understand this, to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before. That's a really sort of optimistic vision of the future, right? And I sort of like the ones with Chris Pine, I'll admit, he's awesome. But that's one vision of the future. Now, in the early 2000s, we sort of had these movies, and I'm trying to kind of just capture, sort of certain genres. Like there was the thought that maybe technology isn't super benevolent. Like maybe something could go wrong. And I think of like Will Smith and iRobot in 2004. And that gave us a vision for the future and for AI, which was still really science fiction-y now and is not at all now. Just, 14 years later, doesn't seem that far out. Or remember this? What about this vision of the future, the Terminator vision? Like, I hope there's a steel mill somewhere because it seems that's the only thing you can do when the Terminator is following you. Have you noticed every time there's like a functioning steel mill that you can just drive your car into? I don't know why. And I also don't, and as much as I love shotguns, but I don't understand why you keep shooting the Terminator with a shotgun. It doesn't do anything. We scream that at the screen when we watch that at my house. But it's amazing, like that's one vision of the future. That's a terrifying vision of the future where technology is evil and trying to kill us. Or maybe our vision of the future is from this documentary where robots are adorable and we're sort of fat and lazy, which if you've ever been to an amusement park, maybe that's true. I don't know. Maybe we're heading there and we just drink big gulps and ride around in chairs and robots do all of the work as we destroy. That's one vision of the future, right? Which is just, I hope there's a little robot like Wally and Eva. They're wonderful. Or maybe remember this in the 90s? Maybe technology's already taken over and we don't know. How freaky is that? Like, I was a youth pastor. I'm telling you, like, there was no better time to be a youth pastor than when The Matrix came out. Man, that's like, my job is over. All I have to do is make cool Matrix. That's probably why I was a horrible youth pastor. But, like, all I need to do is make great Matrix references. But remember that vision of the future is technology will enslave us. Maybe we're inside of the Matrix right now. Who knows? And it's interesting that was a vision of the future. And it's like we use these movies to sort of describe our vision for the future. Now, in the last few years, I've noticed we've made a little bit of a turn, and we're going to talk about this in a couple weeks, but maybe technology isn't the problem. Maybe technology is just sort of ubiquitous. It's just there, but the problem is us. The dystopian genre, oh my goodness, I've read so many of these because I've got a 14 or 15-year-old daughter now. And so I've read so many of these and I've seen so many, and I kind of enjoy them. But it's amazing, like the future is dark, but it's really not technology. It's just we are the problem and government is the problem and we'll be somehow enslaved in a camp. Every one of those has that in it. And it's funny, like the whole dystopian film thing is so in my mind, and this Hunger Games thing is so in my mind that my brother was saying, like, we want to come out and visit the Capitol, and my first thought was, don't take the train. It's bad. Like, the Capitol to me was not Washington, D.C., it was the Hunger Games. But here's and so there's a whole genre. There's a whole idea that the future is dark and we better learn to use a crossbow because, man, it's going to be scary and... Or maybe aliens will just invade. That's one thing we could think about. That's a vision for the future, like when's the big ship? And they always have the big ship just darkening shadow over the city. That's just like part of it. We have to have that. So we'll have some fun with that in the future, thinking about that. Like, what if aliens come? And what if and there's so much of that, but Or maybe aliens come and they're helpful, or they fight the bad aliens. That's sort of the whole superhero genre, not just aliens, but like maybe people can change and people gain powers and aliens come from other planets, but they're friendly. And even the ones that aren't, like Loki's pretty cool. So there's just sort of like, that's a whole thing, obviously, a vision for the future. A vision for the future where it's not just normal people. There are aliens and there are people with superpowers. And so that might be it. But here's what I've really been thinking. As I look back, and we could do this all morning. Like right now, you're like, I can't believe you're not mentioning, and you're right. Like maybe we'll bring it up to me, throw a card in or email us. Maybe we're missing a whole part of the future that is laid out in movies. But really, I think if we're honest and sort of introspective, I think that instead of sort of movies giving us our vision for the future, probably as a whole, as a society, as a culture, I think they get their vision of the future from us. Like the movies about the future probably reflect our society. If you look back in the 40s and 50s, that was all like space travel is going to change everything, and we're going to leave this. And so I think if you look at the different eras of movies about the future and science fiction, and I'll try not to be too crazy geeky here, but I'm saying I think that we can make a really good case that instead of us being influenced by them, we're probably sort of influencing what the movies about the future say, at least by our ticket sales. And so that's why I wanted to talk to you about that. Now, I don't think there's any problem with that, and I think it's interesting to watch. And I honestly, this is not about, and those movies are bad, or and those movies are wrong, but it seems strange to me, at least, as a Christian, that as Christians, as people who have sort of bought into this idea that Jesus is Christ and that he's coming again and that there is a future beyond this earth, beyond this body, be a life after death, that our only real idea of what that future would be from movies, right? Like, I think we're being preached to about the future. But if it's all from movies, maybe we get that wrong. Or maybe they're right. Like, I think we should compare and contrast this month and kind of go, that thing from the movie that you never thought of being from the Bible actually sounds a lot like this. Or this is not what the Bible says the future. I mean, I think it would be interesting, and that's what I want to talk to you about, is this idea that the book is better. Not that the book was better, but that this book, this Bible that we have, actually has a better vision for the future than any of them in different ways, and we'll talk about that. But it's also interesting to me that we don't know a lot about it, and there's good reason, because it is confusing. I won't lie to you. I'm not going to act like I understand all of this. But one thing I want to do this month, just kind of lay out to you, is why don't we talk about the stuff that does seem pretty understandable? Because Revelation includes like sort of symbolism and apocalyptic writing and just this weird style and like dragons and some giant whore of Babylon, which is fun to say, but you don't know what that means. It's like, unless you read Left Behind and it's Hattie. But other than that, like, it's so weird. Like, we have all these things we don't really understand, but in them, and in Ezekiel, and in Daniel, and in the teachings of Jesus, because Jesus talked about this coming world, there are things we absolutely understand. And I find that preachers, especially preachers like me, what we like to do when we don't like what we read is go, I don't quite understand it. Like, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and there was a preacher who had like really, really strong views on things that are really hard to understand, like the Trinity and stuff. And he would tell you like, hey man, I understand exactly how that works. But when it came to things that happen in our society, like gay marriage or women in leadership in the church, he's like, it's pretty hard to understand what the Bible says about that. So I realize that as preachers, when things are difficult to talk about, we kind of go, I'm not sure. But so what I thought I would do this month anyway, and if you'll join me in this, is let's at least go, what are the things that are pretty clear in Revelation and Ezekiel and Daniel and these prophecy books, and kind of compare them with what we've seen in movies. And not to go, oh, this movie's wrong or this movie's right, but to kind of go, we get our picture from the future from movies anyway. Like if we had to describe what the future would be like, we go, it's kind of like Superman with a little bit of Alien mixed in and Hunger Games before the rapture. You know, that's the way. And then what is the rapture? Does that happen? Do you realize we talk about this thing called Rapture, which we really didn't have a good movie for until The Last Avengers. Spoiler alert, sorry, but it's out. You gotta know that. But we have this whole idea, like people be caught away, and there's been movies made of it, really scary movies. Like I got 2 waves of it because I got left behind as like a young adult, and as a kid, they had these, I'm trying to think what they're called. I think they were called Thief in the Night. And they were the most terrifying movies you have ever seen in your life. And it was like, there was these like really weird VW vans that would drive around with a guillotine in the back. Like I can still remember that from church camp. You got saved every time you saw that movie. I am telling you. Maybe we should just have Thief in the Night one week. It would probably be great. But anyway, like my hope is that we can kind of go get a picture of what the Bible does say that we can understand, or at least that I can sort of understand, and compare that to movies and get a vision from the Bible, not just from filmmakers, about what the future. Now, here's a big question that we need to think about, though, as we're talking about this. And let's use, the reason why I wanted to start with this Ready Player One is one question we have to ask ourselves, and I think this is sort of the mark of a good movie about the future, is it plausible? Not is it possible, because pretty much anything's possible, right? You know, people go, hey, it's possible. We're in the multi. I get it. Like, it is, everything's possible. We could be in the Matrix right now, which in that case, I'd just be out there eating donuts because it doesn't matter. But anything's possible. But I'm talking about, is this scenario in a film or in script, is it plausible? And plausible just means reasonable, even probable. Like, could this happen, and is it possible that this is happening? But beyond that, is it reasonable to think this makes sense? And that's what I was thinking about. One reason I think this story in Ready Player One is so captivating to me, and to so many others, why the book was such a success, and to a little lesser extent the film, is it does seem plausible, doesn't it? And it's funny because not that long ago, like earlier in my life as an old man, like the idea of virtual reality, I've never even heard of it. No idea that could be a thing, but now it just seems like, yeah, I can see that. Because we all know people like aren't here this morning, they're playing Fortnite at home. Like, we know this is a real thing. Not that that's virtual reality, but we know that there are people that become so involved in games that they check out of society, right? Like, that's a thing. Like, there's so much in the, and we know that there are people that go, hey, I'm better online than I am in real life. And so this whole idea of a world in the future, in a not so distant future, right, where reality is kind of a bummer, but the online experience is so fantastic that people would sort of go into that game. I don't know about you, but it seems very plausible to me. Like, I can imagine that scenario. It doesn't seem like a far out idea. And you know, it's funny, just the whole idea of multiplayer games from different parts of the world, that's not that long ago that was possible. I mean, a matter of 8 years, 10 years, like when the first beginnings of that happened. But now it's like, oh yeah, of course we do that. Of course, my kid was on the headset last night. He was playing, you know, it's like he was playing with a 45-year-old man who was saying he was a 14-year-old in Russia. Like, it was fine. Like, it's okay. They're coming over next week. It's going to be fine. But like, we can imagine that. Like, parents are worried now. I'm with you. But see, here's the thing. Like, this is plausible to me. And here's another thing that I think is plausible about this story. When you look at the characters in this story, and go rent it or go read it, I'm not going to spoil everything for you. But this idea that people would enter into this game, and people would take part in this challenge, and that some people would go, hey, I honor the maker of this game, you know, like the Gunters, the egg hunters. The Gunters are like, hey, we're going to do this thing. We're going to hunt for the Easter egg in the way that it was intended, in the way that the creator of the game intended. Like, they're into the game. They're going to follow, quote, the rules, even though there aren't many rules. Like, they're going to follow the spirit of the game, and they're going to go for their Easter egg as the creator intended. That makes sense. There are some people like that. I can imagine those people. But on the other hand, there are Sixers. There are the people who are really sort of twisted in their thinking, and they're like, we don't care what the original intent of this game is. We're going to twist it to our own purposes. And in fact, fact, after a while, the Sixers begin to believe like we're greater than the game. We can do what we want with this reality, and that makes sense to me. That seems like reality, like our society, right? And then there's a whole other group of people who sort of are in the oasis, but they're neither Sixers nor Gunters. They're neither like searching for the Easter egg like the faithful or like some nefarious plan. They're not evil. They're just sort of going through life. And by not choosing a side, they've basically chosen a side that they're not going to find the Easter egg. And they're just part of the system. And so that just seems, even as a guy who's not a gamer, I don't think I've never had a virtual reality headset on. I've never played a multiplayer game online, but it just makes sense. Like, yeah, that's the way people would be, and that's the way technology could be. It just seems very, very plausible. Now, I want to play one more clip for you this morning, though, and not to spoil the film if you haven't seen it, but just I want to give you an idea of the prize that they were going for, because that's the whole point, sort of the story is that the creator of the Oasis died. And he left behind his wishes, and he left this amazing prize, and it changed everything. I want to show you this clip. See, as I watched that, and as I read that, that seemed plausible as well, right? That the creator of the game would leave behind this legacy, would leave behind this goal, would leave behind this incredible prize at the end of the game. And what that motivated people to do is there were people who were motivated who sort of just loved the creator and somehow they believed him, even though there was no evidence other than this scoreboard waiting up there. There was this sort of belief that, yes, there is this prize, and they devoted their life to doing things that, quite frankly, didn't seem that smart or that well advised, like spending all their time going for this prize instead of just living life. And then there were the others who are like, I'm not going for that prize. I'll just do my thing in the Oasis, the sort of the bystanders who just went to school and played their games and built their lives online. And then there were the Sixers who violently sort of protested against the creator, who went against his wishes, who were like, we'll take over this Oasis for ourselves. And to me, that feels like human nature, right? So let's talk about reality, not like virtual reality, not the reality we see in movies. And I want to read you something this morning that I think is pretty clear. I don't think this is one of the things from Revelation that we have to argue about or go, I don't know what this means. It's basically the message that Jesus left behind through his best friend John. And it's found in one of the final, in fact, the final chapter of the Bible, what we call the Bible, this collection of books. And it's sort of his going away message like Morrow left in his Easter egg video clip. And I just want to read it to you. And I just want to point out a couple things real quickly this morning. And it says, then he instructed me. This is the angel instructing John. Do not seal up the prophetic words in this book, for the time is near. Let the one who is doing harm continue to do harm. Let the one who is vile continue to be vile. Let the one who is righteous continue to live righteously, and let the one who is holy continue to be holy. Look, I am coming soon, and I'm bringing my reward with me to repay all people according to their deeds. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. Blessed are those who wash their robes. They will be permitted to enter through the gates of the city and eat the fruit for the tree of life. Now, jumping ahead a little bit, we're going to talk about the city in coming weeks. That heaven is not, ooh, baby, a place on earth. Heaven is actually this place that is coming. Now, the Bible says that absent from the body is present with the Lord, but that's not the heaven that Jesus talked about. The story in Revelation and other places in the Bible is that heaven is a city who comes down and sort of terraforms earth, if you want to use a little Superman language, into a completely new planet, a new heaven and a new earth here in this same space we live in now. So he says, and by the way, if you're wondering what kind of fruit everyone would want to eat, it's the fruit that makes you live forever.
And he said, outside the city are dogs. And I'm not thinking he actually means canines, although that would be adorable. The sorcerers, the sexual immoral, and only cats inside heaven. I'm sorry. Sexually immoral and murderers and idol worships and all who love to live a lie. I, Jesus, have sent my angel to give you this message for the churches. And I am both the source of David and the heir to his throne. I am the bright morning star. So as we sort of wrap up and sort of look into the future, I want you to notice that Jesus wanted us to know these things. So a good reason for us to go, hey, well, maybe we should at least figure out what the future is. And if you're wondering, like, wow, is Don gone crazy prophecy? And is he going to talk about Revelation any week? It's been 10 years, and this is the first time it's come up. I'm not that into it, and for good reason if you're not either. Like, I think there's so many things that we should think about here on earth. I think there are so many things we should work on in our lives. But my goodness, it's important because Jesus said, don't seal it up. Don't hide it. This is important. I want you to also notice, and this is really important because it explains so much in our world. He said, let the one who's doing harm continue to do harm. The one who's vile, let him be vile. If you're righteous, basically what he's saying is, I'm going to let this game play out. Not that he wouldn't be involved at all. And it reminded me of Ready Player One as I read this, like this idea that Morrow, that the creator of the game would set up this game and then go, hey, here's the prize, and here's the end, and here's the keys. But you don't find a lot of him sort of stopping things when they go bad, or stopping the Sixers, or interfering or intervening. Not a lot of that. He lets the game play out, and that is the idea that Jesus gives us. But very important to notice, he says, look, I'm coming soon. And they thought that was soon then. Like, they thought this could happen anytime. Paul said, I don't even know if I'm going to make it through my lifetime before Jesus came back. And that was thousands of years ago. We also found out Jesus thinks that a day is like 1,000 years, so it's only been a couple days to Jesus due to space-time continuum, or at least Star Trek. So very interesting, very confusing, but he says, look, I'm coming back soon, bringing my reward with me to repay all people according to their deeds. So that's something important to know, right? Like that in the end, it does matter not just what we believe, not just what we think, but Jesus said eventually, and in other places, he says the living and the dead, so you don't get out of this judgment just because you die before he comes back. And then this is so powerful and so beautiful for us. It says, blessed are those who wash their robes. They will be permitted to enter through the gates of the city and eat the fruit from the tree of life. What that says and why that would make more sense to a Jewish culture that it's actually written to, or at least a culture of that time, is they understood that in order to go into the temple, into the presence of God, you had to, you couldn't go in a sweatshirt and flip-flops like we would think, like it's casual Friday. No, like there was a whole idea of like washing your clothes and being well prepared and being clean. Now, thankfully, we don't do that because we realize that it's a cleanness of heart. But he's saying there is a possibility through Jesus, thankfully, that those of us who have dirtied our robes, as all of us have, can still go into this city, and that's through the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. And finally, he says, I've sent my angel to give you this message to churches. So this message is for us. Here in York, Pennsylvania, and Action Church and a converted nightclub, this message is for us. It's not for anybody. It's still for the church. And so I want to leave you with an idea today that I think is so powerful. That this idea where he says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end, is not a title. This is not like, I'm the world champion of, it's not that. I used to think of it like, oh, that's his title, or he's talking about how awesome. No. Guys, this is a promise. This is a promise. He's saying, to those of you who believe I started this thing, understand I have an ending in mind. Just like in Ready Player One, the game is created, the oasis is formed, and then people go into it. And then when Morrow dies and he sets out this new Easter egg, he's like, there is an end. There is a prize. There are 3 keys that you must get to the prize. He laid out this plan. That's what Jesus is saying here. Like, this didn't just start and I have no idea how it's going to end up. Ooh, that's going to be exciting. No, he's saying, like, I have an end game in mind, and there is a plan. Just like there was a plan for creation, there is a plan for a new creation, a new heaven and a new earth, which comes down out of the sky. So I guess the question is that plausible? Possible? Yeah, anything's possible. Do we know? No, we do not. And just because I say, oh, I know in my heart, I know that doesn't affect you a lot, because guess what? We all have an aunt who knows in her heart that her cat channels her grandma, and we don't believe that. So I get that. But it's funny, when we watch Ready Player One, we go, you know what? This virtual reality was created by someone, right? Nobody says like, oh, it just happened. I just put on the headset one day. Woo, there what? No. It's funny that whether it's any kind of technology or any kind of future, we go, well, somebody created it. So is it plausible that there was a creator for this entire universe? I think so. I think it's as good an explanation as any. Probably better than most. And if he was the creator, if there was a creator who started this whole thing, is it plausible that there's an end game, that it doesn't just run out forever, that things don't just happen and someday, we just destroy the earth and, well, we're out of luck, or we get better and better and we don't need, it's interesting because what this scenario that Jesus lays out is that it's all part of the game. From the very beginning creation to we reach the point that Revelation talks about it, where the earth is basically destroyed. For you dystopian fans, there's lots of that coming. I'll talk about that next week. But then this new heaven comes down and the earth is remade and everyone lives forever. So I want the band to come back up. But I think not only is that plausible, and at least possible, and you should basically explore that, but if that is the case, just like in the story from Ready Player One, wouldn't it also be possible that some people would buy into what the Creator said, that's Christians, and live their life in a way that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense unless there is an Easter egg at the end? And wouldn't it also be possible that other people would just go through their life and sort of ignore it and just enjoy the oasis or enjoy the reality and kind of go, yeah, but I'm not buying into either. But by doing that, they choose not to find the Easter egg? And isn't it also plausible, at least possible, that other people would rebel against that Creator? That's the story of the Bible. Now, here's what I want to leave you with this morning as the guys get ready to play. Good news. Of all the different scenarios we've laid out and we're going to talk about over the next week, man, the book is better. Even than Ready Player One, I swear, because in our scenario, in the scenario of Revelation, the scenario that Jesus laid out, our Creator isn't dead. He's very much alive. And in fact, the story of Jesus is that midway through the game, he went, they need a little help. So he sent his son back to us to sort of save us from ourselves and make it possible. And here's the good news. There's not one Easter egg. It's not like, oh, we're all competing for one salvation and one of us is going to be fabulously rich and the rest of us are screwed. No, God created this plan where all of us, anyone, it said anyone who would come could be a part of this amazing, wealthy, rich scenario. And I'm not talking about monetarily, even though it appears that they use gold for building materials. And here's the thing, but we don't have multiple lives to live to play the game. We don't get to push restart. And in fact, as I was saying yesterday at the Quinceanera, I was talking to Zaires Quinceanera was yesterday and presented him with Bible, and I said the problem with life is that we never get to talk to anyone who won the game. We never get to talk to anyone who finished the game. We just have to sort of ask people around us who have gone a little further than us. And so I've got great news for you, and I want the band to play. I'm just going to pray a prayer, but there's a new earth coming. Friendly aliens, angels, do invade, and good news if you've watched a lot of shows where the planet goes up in a nuclear blast or we just sort of run out of resources. Good news, there's help coming for that too, because the earth is going to be remade. And good news from the book, if you're worried like, man, humans are so unjust, and we think about like the dystopian future due to man's inhumanity to man, well, good news, justice is coming. And the earth is going to get a major overhaul. And so I want to pray with you. And I just want you to take away one thing this morning. that Jesus made a promise. Not a title, not I am the beginning and the end, not a title, but Jesus made a promise that I have a plan just as much as I did at creation, but for the end of this. And it's so much better than any Easter egg you could imagine from Ready Player One. Dear Jesus, God in heaven, we are grateful that there is a game plan for the end of this earth. God, we don't fully understand it. Just open our eyes. Open our eyes and allow us to sort of grasp these really big concepts. But God, you promised that these things were for us. And so over the next month, I pray that everyone who will just get a better picture from your word about what our future is. But God, way, 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 way bigger than that. God, I pray for all of the people here. It's not a mistake they're here. That they would be people who come, who join into your plan for eternity. And we want to be a part of that for all eternity. In your name we pray. Amen.